Okay, well, welcome to the January 26th edition of Going Viral at GoingViral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman. I'm joined on the line with Ken Aaron in California, Dennis Goldstein, and Michael Jankowitz, and myself, Jim Dingeman, in the greater metropolitan area of New York City. Today, let's just start off with the lead story. The lead story, of course, in the United States was that Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer will announce his retirement. And he's 83. He's been under pressure from progressives eager to fill the seat. As we know, President Biden promised to have a African-American female fill that role. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting to watch the Republicans react to this, too. Now, in news, we're going to spend, in the initial part of the show, a lot of concentration on this latest situation with the Ukraine. But suffice it to say, just as we start with, is that the U.S. essentially has said yet to President Putin's demands of December 17th. And they hold firm on the right of Kiev to join NATO. But we'll explore that in a few minutes in greater detail. Today, of course, is the day before International Holocaust Day. Holocaust Remembrance Day is set to the January 27th, 1945 liberation of Auschwitz. And we'll also start to show off with a little piece from the Holocaust Memorial Museum talking about that. Now, today, Prince Andrew has denied being a co-conspirator in the Epstein trial. And we're talking about, of course, the indictment and conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell. And he now is insisting on a jury trial against his accuser in the United States. So we'll see how that works. In the case of other news stories going on here, the DOJ is investigating who in the states around the country decided to send fake electors to the Congress. And we're trying to see what happens with those people. Now, also, it's interesting, we have a fight, and I'm sure we'll have some commentary from Ken on this, because I know he likes to listen to Joe Rogan. But Neil Young has decided to, well, I guess he lost his fight. So Joe Rogan, who has one of the largest audiences on Spotify in the world, basically, Neil Young said, I don't want my music on the website if you're going to have Joe Rogan on, because he's an anti-vaxxer. And essentially, a platform, the Spotify has decided to remove Neil Young. So he's no longer on Spotify. Now, another issue that's important to talk about, this also made the headlines today, is the Federal Reserve indicates its increase in interest rates as the inflation rises. So that's a whole other issue. There's an increase in inflation. Let me just talk a little bit about some of the issues that have to do with global climate change. There is a rocketing demand around the world in fossil fuels. That and if we accompany it with look at what just happened in the Build Back America collapse, that whole Biden domestic initiative that had in it key provisos to deal with global climate change, and some of them were withdrawn as we move forward to the latest stage. A report says that this rocketing demand for fossil fuels globally could deal a fatal blow to climate goals around the world. When I wanted to first start with something, this is something I've always had a issue with my colleagues in Pacifica, and that is they never ever talk about the meaning of this on the 27th of January, and they never devote anything. And this is a piece that talks about Holocaust Remembrance Day. That is tomorrow, on January 27th. That is the day that elements of the Red Army moved and encountered and saw for the first time Auschwitz. They had already liberated other death camps, in particular in the eastern. Remember, the death camps were, as opposed to the concentration camps, the extermination camps were essentially moved into the eastern part of Poland, Majdanek and all the other camps. But this is quite a stunning thing. Years ago, when I was covering these issues, there were still veterans alive who had liberated Auschwitz. And it was funny when the Americans were trying to figure out which units in the American army should be given streamers for liberating concentration camps. You had a lot of veterans come up and say, well, I liberated Auschwitz. And, you know, it just showed you how memory and the power of imagery and remembrance conflated and confused, because no Americans, of course, were the liberators of Auschwitz. It was the Red Army. But this is from the U.S. Holocaust Museum. This is a little compilation they did to remember Holocaust Remembrance Day.
You who live safe in your warm houses, you who find returning in the evening hot food and friendly faces. Consider if this is a man who works in the mud, who does not know peace, who fights for a scrap of bread, who dies because of yes or a no. Consider if this is a woman without hair and without name, with no more strength to remember. Her eyes empty, her womb cold, like a date that this came about. I commend these words to you. Carve them in your hearts, at home, in the street. Go into bed rising. Repeat them to your children.
I am a Holocaust survivor born in Czechoslovakia. I survived Auschwitz, but lost my mother, brothers, sister, and 59 other members of my family. Like my fellow survivors, I share my experiences so that others may learn about the consequences of unchecked hate and anti-Semitism. The United Nations established this day of commemoration so the world will never forget. It marks the day when Auschwitz was liberated. For so many, Auschwitz is a symbol of the ultimate expression of hatred and inhumanity. For me, it isn't a symbol. It was and is my reality.
6 million Jews murdered and millions of others brutalized by the Nazis. Every generation must understand what led to the Holocaust. My mother gave me to a family for safekeeping before she and my father were deported to more than 12 concentration camps. Many parents, like mine, made the difficult choice to put their child's safety ahead of their own. Some of us survived because someone took a risk to help. My sisters were placed with 2 devout Catholic women who lived next door to us. My sisters, however, were betrayed and were killed in Auschwitz. I was placed with a Dutch Indonesian family and their Muslim nanny. They saw how we were persecuted simply because we were Jews, and they could not be silent. The choices and sacrifices they made were dangerous and selfless. This history teaches us that we can all make a difference and shape a future that is different from our past.
They would come in at dawn. You heard the shooting, you knew that several hundred people are going to be taken out and shot, and you were just sitting there shivering. Maybe they're going to come to our house to take us too.
The earth was moving on top of the grave for weeks.
We went in hiding. The Polish friend didn't do this for money. He was a good friend of ours. While we were in the barn, there was so much shooting and executing outside. And during the deportation in my town, they killed 200 people.
All we had on was a loose cap and no underwear, no scarves, wooden clogs, no socks. So hungry. I remember being so hungry. We were covered with lice and mange and scabs. Our skin was infected. We had no medication.
We were little people between a big machine.
Now, my mother was very Orthodox. Mrs. Orlewska was deeply religious, and she respected my mother's religion also. She knew that it had to be kosher. So she took one pot, which she said she'll scrub it up real good, and she won't use any fat at all. So she cooked potato soup for us every single day, and my mother would say, "Take a little money from this." She would not accept. And Mama would say, "Take a little money when you go to Mass and give it to the poor." And she would say, "There are no poorer people than you. You children have no fresh air. You have no light. You have no freedom. Nobody is poorer than you." She wouldn't take a penny. Never. She never took a penny. She did it out of the goodness of her heart.
There was a group of young men and women who risked their lives day in and day out to assist other Jews who worked on false papers, who smuggled money, and all they did this all to have others survive. And I am alive thanks to them.
Why did the rescuers do it? My mother said to me, "You know we can get killed, but you know, even if it's the last thing you do, you have to do that. Because you can't live with that injustice and not do anything, and then live with yourself and knowing you didn't do everything you could." I wouldn't want to live in a world where nobody cares a damn.
All right. And that's from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Commission. That is a piece they did for today, although Holocaust Remembrance Day is tomorrow on January 27th. And you're listening to Going Viral at goingviral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman. We're going to focus in now on the latest developments in the Ukraine. I'm going to start with the NewsHour, a little bit of piece from them today, talking about the rejection of the negotiations that have been going on between Blinken and the State Department and Russia. As you recall, in mid-December, Putin gave a set of demands to the United States, which they were asked to study, and this included essentially the United States withdrawing from Europe, essentially withdrawing from its recognition of because essentially de facto we are indeed engaged in NATO enlargement. So that's something I think we should be blunt about and honest about. But let's just hear what the NewsHour had to say about this tonight. This is just broadcast a few hours ago.
Ukraine never joined NATO, but suggested other diplomatic off-ramps to try to defuse the crisis over Ukraine. Nick Schifrin has more on the day's developments.
In Moscow today, an effort to save diplomacy. U.S. Ambassador John Sullivan left the Foreign Affairs Ministry after delivering a written document that Secretary of State Antony Blinken said reiterated a core U.S.-NATO principle.
I can't be more clear. NATO's door is open, remains open, and that is our commitment.
But that is the very commitment Russia demands the U.S. break as it deploys equipment and 100,000 troops to Ukraine's border, including new video today of fighter jets in Belarus to Ukraine's north and ships off Crimea to Ukraine's south. Back in December, Russia demanded that NATO close its open door to other European countries, including Ukraine, and roll back all its forces and weapons in Europe to 1997 levels. Giving in to that demand would rewrite decades of U.S. and NATO policy and the map. In 1949, NATO's eastern border was Italy. By 1997, it had added 4 more countries for a total of 16. Since then, in 5 rounds of expansion, it's grown to 30 countries, including those on Russia's border. In 2008, NATO said Ukraine and Georgia would become future members.
There is no change. There will be no change.
But what the U.S. is offering, mutual limits on Eastern European exercises like these in Poland and missile deployments by reviving the defunct Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, that banned an entire class of nuclear weapons.
We also do lay out areas where we believe that together we could actually advance security for everyone, including for Russia. The placement of offensive missile systems in Ukraine, military exercises and maneuvers in Europe, potential arms control measures, greater transparency.
But even before Blinken spoke, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov suggested it wasn't good enough.
If there is no constructive answer, and if the West continues its aggressive course, Moscow, as President Putin has repeatedly said, will take the necessary retaliatory measures.
The U.S. and NATO are also trying to deter war by reinforcing NATO's eastern flank with European jets, European soldiers under NATO command, and as many as 8,500 U.S. troops. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
We have plans in place that we can activate, execute on very short notice. So what we have done over the last weeks is to increase readiness.
To reassure allies, the administration is working to replace Russian natural gas that Europe relies on in case Russia cuts exports. But the U.S. admits that ultimately, whether diplomacy lives another day will be decided by Vladimir Putin.
The document is with them, and the ball is in their court.
For more on the confrontation with Russia and where things stand diplomatically, we turn to Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, who's held a number of foreign policy positions at the State Department and on the national security staff during Republican administrations. Richard Haass, welcome back to the NewsHour. So the U.S. has sent its written responses today. Why is the Biden administration rejecting Russia's key public demands?
Well, Article 10 of the NATO alliance talks about the openness of the alliance for other members. And we can't be in a situation where Russia can essentially determine who gets to be a NATO member or not. That's the province of the alliance. That's in the sovereign decision-making right of the United States and its 29 allies. So it's simply, and to say one other thing, Nick, Russians know that. What we don't know is whether their positions represent an opening bid from which they're prepared to negotiate and compromise, or whether this is essentially setting up diplomacy to fail.
So those negotiations or those compromises that the U.S. wants to talk about include limiting military exercises in Europe, restricting missile deployments, and new arms control agreements. Is that the right approach, do you think, that the Biden administration is taking?
Well, I think it's all fine. And to that, you could probably add negotiations dealing with the Russian presence in eastern Ukraine. The real question, again, is whether it's enough for Mr. Putin. He's manufactured this crisis. He's placed 100,000 troops on the border. For him to walk away, if you will, take the off-ramp, it means that he has to think there's enough in it to save face, to talk to his own people, to tell the world that he didn't climb down because he was pressured. So I simply don't know. I don't think any of us know whether this will be enough for him to justify a change in his behavior.
Secretary Blinken today stressed allied unity, but as you know, there are differences. Germany, for example, is blocking weapons going to Ukraine and refusing to threaten to cut off the pipeline, Nord Stream 2, in case Russia invades Ukraine. Is NATO really unified?
No, but then it wasn't unified during the Cold War either. There were always tensions within the alliance about how to deal with the Soviet Union, about the wisdom of going ahead or not going ahead with various military deployments. So we're seeing similar things now about how to deal with Russia. The Germans are obviously very skittish. Their energy dependency simply adds to it. There's also simply a lot of history here and a lot of geography here. And not surprisingly, in an alliance of 30 countries, you have a real range of opinions, and that's part of the challenge facing the Biden administration. Putin knows that, and it's one of the reasons he might, I emphasize the word might, think about a scenario where he uses a limited amount of force, because the more limited the scenario, the deeper the cracks are likely to be within NATO.
One of the challenges that Putin faces also is the calendar. And this morning we heard from the Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, who suggested that Vladimir Putin would not launch an invasion during the Olympics, which start next Friday, because it would take away from Xi Jinping's big moment. Do you agree? I
think it's probably right. Russia's too dependent on China strategically. Economically, it's one of the reasons that sanctions may not have the desired effect. That takes you through February 20th. After that, he probably has a month in which the weather is cooperative, the ground is largely frozen. So all things being equal, if he is thinking about something that involves an intervention, I think you're more likely to be looking in the month that follows the close of the Olympics.
And I'm wondering also if I could ask you about a little domestic politics here. Yesterday, we heard from the top Republican in Congress, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, say that Biden was, quote, moving in the right direction in confronting Russia and supporting Ukraine militarily. But very often on the top cable channel host, Tucker Carlson on Fox, he urges the U.S. to go soft on Russia. Explain that dichotomy. Where is the Republican Party today on Russia?
It's hard to speak about the Republican Party as a singular entity. I think the mainstream or relatively mainstream Republican Party pretty much agrees with the Biden administration, essentially strengthening NATO, threatening Putin with various sanctions, bolstering Ukraine's ability to resist an invasion or occupation, but maintaining some diplomatic off-ramp. I quite honestly don't fathom or understand the sympathy we're seeing on parts of the far right for Mr. Putin. He is repressive to his own people at home. He interferes in American democracy. He uses military force with some abandon, both in Europe and the Middle East. He gets up every morning and he basically thinks about what can he do to undermine the world that the United States has helped build, how to undermine American democracy. So I simply don't understand the sympathy he seems to be generating in some quarters.
Richard Haass, President of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay, so that was Richard Haass. Now let me turn to another person who was commenting about this today. This is a discussion that occurred last night on France 24. This is what's interesting about this is it sort of gets into the issues of the French and the Germans, the differences in alliance and the kind of opinions about it. You'll note an American involved here who's a real character. He's some guy I met many years ago, and you'll see he was actually an internationally award-winning journalist. He used to work for Rolling Stone, and he was educated in England and began to operate as a journalist in the swinging 60s. And then he became a person who, well, you'll see he's got some pretty interesting opinions about this. But this is Francois Picard on France 24 last night, talking about particularly France and Germany.
Increasingly seems like it's happening. Now surrounded on three sides, the recent victim of a cyber attack that feels like a dry.
Kiev's trying to keep calm and rally support. NATO countries sending weapons, advisors, deploying fresh troops elsewhere.
Can you put the volume up? It's a little faint.
100,000 plus forces amassed by Moscow, and for citizens of most
North Atlantic Treaty Alliance members, Ukraine, well, it's far away. So here's the question. How far is the West willing to go? We'll ask about the leaders working the phones, Europe's reliance on Russian gas to make it through winter, and of Vladimir Putin, whose own hand can seem strong. Ukraine's in his backyard. He's built up a war chest thanks to high oil and gas prices, but also weak. Sanctions could hit hard, and it's anyone's guess how public opinion would react to that or the prospect of body bags coming back from the Western Front. More broadly, what to do when both Cold War superpowers view each other as giants with feet of clay. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking about war at what price? And joining us from Brussels, Bernard Guetta, member of the European Parliament from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party, the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening. My pleasure.
With us as well, Anastasia Shapochkinka, lecturer in geopolitics at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. You're also the president of the Eastern Circles think tank.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. Good to see you as well Craig Kapitas, contributing editor at Quartz, author of Bear Hunting with the Politburo. How are you?
Ready to hunt bear.
All right. From Geneva, Stéphane Monnier, Chief Investment Officer at private investment bank Lombard Odier, who's been crunching the numbers on all of this. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. My pleasure.
the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Let's begin with the latest, a press conference that broke up a short while ago in Berlin, and it was the French president paying a call on the German chancellor, Emmanuel Macron, who had strong words. We're going to hear him talk about how there will be a high cost for Russia if it does decide to attack. A high cost if they decide to attack. He even went further, Bernard Guetta, talking about the fact that there is asymmetrical warfare, a hybrid destabilization were the words used by Macron. Now, the French president raised eyebrows last week. That speech he gave, you were there perhaps at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where he talked about the need for dialogue with Russia. Some interpreted that as being soft on Moscow. He sounded like it was a tough line today, ahead of talks that are due to take place Wednesday in Paris. Was that standard Macron, or has he been clarifying his remarks from last week?
But you know, it was wrongly seen as a soft on Putinism. Actually, it was quite hard. But we have the European countries and altogether the democracies of the Western countries. We have to have two hands, one a diplomatic hand and a sanctioned hand. And I would say that the Western countries are much more united than it seemed, and that they will be much tougher than it seems also. And on the other hand, Mr. Putin, I would say, is weaker and weaker, and not stronger and stronger. And precisely because he's weaker and weaker, he's more and more dangerous and unpredictable. And so the situation is quite frightening,
All right, Putin weaker and weaker and therefore more dangerous. We're going to pick up on that point. Before we do, let's listen to Emmanuel Macron talking. Again, it's on the eve of the first time in more than 2 years that the so-called Normandy format is meeting here in Paris. That is to say, the four countries, France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia.
There is dialogue in the Normandy format on the Ukrainian issue and the Minsk agreement. And there is dialogue between the European Union and Russia. Each of these channels must be exploited as much as possible to re-engage Russia in a de-escalation process and obtain guarantees. Should there be any aggression, there will be retaliation, and the cost will be very high.
Anastasia Shapochkin, your thoughts on the wording of Emmanuel Macron on the eve of, by the way, not just this meeting that's taking place here Wednesday in Paris, but the phone call the French president will have with his Russian counterpart on Friday.
I cannot agree with my opponent or our guest in Brussels that the words were sounding tough. Of course, there was an intention of these words to sound tough, but it is clear that neither the French foreign policy, whose strategic interest privileges rather partnership with Russia than confrontation with it, nor the French business interest, which has high stakes in Russia, in the energy sector, in the automotive sector, in the food and retail sector. We can go on and on along the list of the CAC 40 companies to name vested interests, including companies with very high state participation in their shareholding structure, who have high interests and a good relationship with Moscow. For France, definitely, good relationship is much more important than any wins, quote unquote, they could get from a potential conflict, and therefore they talk about de-escalation. On the other hand, Macron is also, for Russia, is also not just a friendly, France is not just a friendly power, it's a useful power. Macron's words about the reflecting a stable position in the French foreign policy about the need of a European defense, which is separate from NATO, not mentioning NATO, evoking that idea again and again, which is an old idea, is not in respect to this crisis particular, but that plays clearly into the hands of Russia, because that also underlines the division within NATO itself. That kind of shows that there is an attempt to promote its own political agenda and its own foreign policy agenda. And
At the press conference, he did, though, say that he was for a European dialogue and a dialogue through NATO, both, he said.
And a dialogue through NATO. However, we know, and especially we know that the recent urge to promote the defense alliance, European defense alliance, in addition to NATO maybe, but still separate from NATO, is also playing against the backdrop of the EU-US scandal, and therefore with the recent division and fallout between France and the US. That hasn't fallen on deaf ears in the Kremlin. The Kremlin is aware of these undercurrents, and the Kremlin knows that neither France nor Germany have stakes in getting into conflict with Russia. Well, neither the US has those stakes either. And US, which is privileging China, which has privileged China as its main new opponent and competitor in its own strategy, is also not interested in this. It's kind of reactive. Everybody's reactive in this conflict, and it's Russia who holds really the reins and who gives the agenda.
All right, Craig Kapidis, of course, if the French are talking about a European path, it's because the previous president of the United States seemed to wash his hands of a lot of all of this, and the U.S. is not the NATO leader it once was in the eyes of Europeans.
A lot of talk, isn't there, Francois? Right? Am I right? We all hearing a lot of talk. The problem is no one who's doing the talking speaks or understands Russian. First of all, Russian leaders for centuries have viewed their neighbors as vassal states or enemies. You can look it up. You want to talk different? You want to think different? Go right ahead. Now, for the past more than 30 years, we had Bill Clinton talking Yaley hillbilly. We had Bush II talking Yaley Texan. Obama speaking about Russia in perfume. Trump spoke in ignorance, and Biden is now speaking weaselly, albeit, right?
3,500 troops announced for Eastern Europe, the arrival of the military equipment, that's weaselly?
What's happening right now is the sum of all the past 30 years. The predecessors of Biden's predecessors' miscalculations. And what is war but the unfolding of miscalculation? And that is precisely what's going on here. Russia holds all the cards. Why? Because America and NATO helped them stack the deck. Where do we start? The Sudetenland adventure in Crimea? We want to talk about Georgia? Oh, we don't have the time. Putin's in control here.
All right. So that is France 24. And you're listening to Going Viral at goingviral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman. We're giving different media perspectives on the crisis in the Ukraine. Richard Haass, of course, is a former head of the policy planning at the State Department under Bush 1. And Kapidis is the person I was referring to. He's quite a character. Yeah, I like that Yale hillbilly stuff. That was pretty funny to listen to. But everybody on mute. We're going to try something different here. But I'll start off with Steve to give his perspective. There's a lot more to talk about. I don't know, Alex, if you dug up anything, because obviously other media outlets are going to cover this very differently than what we're seeing in the United States and in France 24. But Steve, give me your impressions of where we're at with all this.
I think that we have to look at this, and other people have said this too, I'm not the only one, in terms of the historical perspective of what happened in Eastern Europe as the Soviet Union gradually collapsed. And when Gorbachev was still the general secretary, he apparently was given a guarantee, and this was at the time of the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the withdrawal of the Red Army from Eastern Germany. He was given a guarantee that NATO would not come to the borders of the then Soviet Union. Obviously, that and he from what I've read, not an expert in this, and maybe others on the program will correct me if I'm wrong. There was no written agreement to that effect. This was verbal. And this was a huge mistake that Gorbachev made. Then in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, while Russia was being led by a drunk, otherwise known as Yeltsin, whose principal task was to distribute the all of the assets of the former Soviet Union to various friends of his, who eventually became the dominant factors in Russia, and gradually, then NATO moved east, so that the Baltic countries became members of NATO. Poland became a member of NATO. Romania became a member of NATO. I'm not sure about Czechoslovakia, but Czechoslovakia has a very small toe as on a border with Russia. So I think we have to look at this in the historical context. And also there was the attempt in 2008 to make Georgia, which is far to the east on the other side of the Black Sea, a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Russia stopped that from happening. The immediate cause was an attempt by the government of Georgia to impose its national control on the two northernmost provinces of Georgia, which happened to be Russian-speaking, even more Russian-speaking than the two eastern provinces of the Ukraine, in my understanding. The Russian army invaded and, in fact, ended up in Tbilisi and could have taken over the whole country, but they obviously didn't want to do that. They withdrew, and so Abkhazia and the other province, the name of which slips my mind.
Ossetia. It's Ossetia.
It's what?
Ossetia.
Yes. So yeah. They became essentially independent within the nation of Georgia. So I think we have to look at this one thing is in the historical context. The other element I think we have to look at is, why do the Western powers want to make Ukraine a part of NATO? Ukraine, all of the other countries that have been made a part of NATO are to the west of, clearly to the west of Russia. There's a north-south boundary, which essentially is along the lines of the old Brest-Litovsk Treaty. But Ukraine is obviously, you look at the map, it's the soft underbelly of Russia. So I think before, certainly and I don't know. I mean, I look at this from the left, obviously, but I have no idea why the United States is so intent upon bringing Ukraine into NATO. And perhaps other people on the program have an answer to that. I will just also say that one of the reasons for the Russian intervention in the two eastern provinces, well, Crimea was the occupation of Crimea was easy. Sevastopol is Russia's only warm water port. At the time that they entered Crimea, took over Crimea, they had Sevastopol only on a lease, a 30-year lease from the Ukrainian government. And they were certainly very concerned that the new Ukrainian government might just cancel that lease. And unless they went to war at that point with Ukraine, that they would lose Sevastopol. Also, 90% of the people of Crimea speak Russian. So that's a separate case. And nobody is making, even in the West, is making too much, too much of that situation. The last comment is this: the present two easternmost provinces are primarily Russian speaking. They had a certain degree of self-government for local affairs under the previous Ukrainian government. When the revolution occurred in 1814. Yeah,
Right. 2014.
We're going to bring Alex into this. In 1814, he's an expert on this stuff. And it wasn't 1914 either. It was 2014. That's an interesting, isn't that interesting date though in history, right? 1814, 1914 and 2014. There were major right-wing elements in the government of Ukraine that was established at that time. One of them was directly descended from the Ukrainian faction that had fought on the side of the Wehrmacht,
right,
in 1941. So the two eastern provinces were very, very concerned about that, and that's a major reason why Russia went in at that time. That's all. I'm sorry I've gone on.
No, that's fine. That's fine, Steve. It's a complicated thing to unravel, and just everybody stay tuned for a second. I wanted to play this piece because this deals with Germany more directly, because Germany, of course, this talks about how the Germans have blocked military equipment to go to Ukraine, and also talks a little bit about the German admiral who was basically ousted from power because he said, well, it makes sense that what's Putin doing. I understand what he's up to, but let's just hear what they have to say.
Blocking Estonia from giving military support to Ukraine by refusing to issue permits for German-origin weapons to be exported to Kiev as it braces for a potential Russian invasion. The German government has declined to export lethal weapons directly to Ukraine, unlike the United States, the United Kingdom, Poland, and other allies. German officials said the impasse results from a long-standing policy regarding arms exports to tense regions. A German government spokesman said, the principle governing arms exports is always the same, whether they come directly from No permission has been issued at this stage. An Estonian government official said that his government is still trying to persuade Germany to change its mind. Kristo Envaga, advisor to the Estonian defense minister, said, hopefully we will get the approval from Germany. Estonia has shown that we want to help Ukraine in practical terms in any way we can. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock hoped tensions with Russia over Ukraine could be solved by diplomacy, but she warned,
now I'm ready to go.
Well, a little
that
interruption
Moscow would
there.
suffer if it does attack its neighbor. She said, each further aggressive act will have a high price for Russia, economically. The only way. Baerbock emphasized that different historical responsibilities are the reason for this and that Germany will support Ukraine by other means. Her announcement came the same day that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen proposed a €1.2 billion emergency aid package to help Ukraine now to address its financing needs due to the conflict. The money still needs to be approved by Parliament. At issue with Estonia are exports of the D-30, a howitzer that fires a 122mm shell around 20 kilometers.
Ooh.
The howitzers, originally made in the Soviet Union, were stationed in former East Germany. After German reunification, Berlin exported the guns to Finland in the 1990s, which then passed them on to Estonia in 2009, Estonian, Finnish and German officials said. At the time, Estonia bought 42 howitzers and the related ammunition. Similar weapons are being used by several dozen countries, including Ukraine, which has close to 150 of them. Estonian Minister of Defense Kolli Laanit, Latvian Minister of Defense Artis Pabriks, and Lithuanian Minister of Defense Arvydas Anasauskas issued a press statement in support of Ukraine, noting that they had received the necessary approvals from the United States to send weapons and are continuing cooperation to send weapons to Ukraine quickly. With the United States approval, Estonia will provide Javelin anti-armor missiles, while Latvia and Lithuania will provide Stinger anti-aircraft missiles and other equipment to bolster Ukraine's defensive military capability. The granting of assistance follows the agreement of the US government to transfer US-produced equipment to Ukraine. On the other side, Germany faced a diplomatic incident following comments made by Navy Chief Joachim Schonbach on Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Ukraine crisis. Schonbach stepped down from his position. He made the comments during a talk that he gave in a visit to India.
I think Putin is probably putting pressure on us because he can do it. And he knows that he splits the European Union. But what he really wants is respect. He wants, on eye level, he wants respect. And my God, giving someone respect is low cost, even no cost. So if I was asked, I'm not asked, but I was asked, it is easy to even give him the respect he really demands and probably also deserves. Okay, the Crimea Peninsula is gone. They'll never come back. This is it. This is a fact.
The remarks directly contradicted the official view held by the EU and the US. Washington and its allies say that Moscow's 2014 annexation of the peninsula from Ukraine was unacceptable and must be reversed. Ukraine's foreign ministry said it has summoned German Ambassador Anke Feldhusen to stress the categorical unacceptability of Schonbach's comments. Later on Twitter, he wrote, "My defense policy remarks during a talk session at a think tank in India reflected my personal opinion at that moment. They in no defense ministry." The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry called on Germany to reject Schonbach's comments regarding Crimea, saying they undermine the efforts to counter Russian aggression. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said, "Ukraine is grateful to Germany for the support it has already provided since 2014, as well as for the diplomatic efforts to resolve the Russian-Ukrainian armed conflict. But Germany's current statements are disappointing and run counter to that support and effort. The German partners must stop undermining unity with such words and actions and encouraging Vladimir Putin to launch a new attack on Ukraine." Kiev also highlighted its deep disappointment at the German government's position on the failure to provide defensive weapons to Ukraine. The lack of weapon support is another point of contention between the two countries. Germany plans to send a field medical facility to Ukraine next month, but it continues to refuse the transfer of weapons despite fears of a Russian invasion. In February, a complete field hospital will be handed over, including the necessary training, all co-financed by Germany to the tune of $6 billion, German Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht said. Germany has already supplied respirators and treated seriously wounded Ukrainian soldiers at its military hospitals for years, the minister said. Lambrecht said the German government will evade the crisis with Russia. However, arms transfers to Ukraine
so
were not an
that's
option.
a discussion on Germany, and I wanted to throw that into the mix because, that was interesting that this admiral was forced to resign because of his comments, and of course, Nord Stream 2, the pipeline that's doubling Nord Stream 1. In other words, they would get about 110 million barrels a day through the expansion as opposed to 55 million. Well, that's being, as we know, sort of prevented from being operational. But still, the other aspect of this, which is explored further in the France 24 piece, is the impact economically of all that natural gas coming in from Russia. They estimate about 48% of the natural gas into Germany comes from Nord Stream 1. So the issue of that is that some are arguing the United States, even if it scrambles all over in great haste, it cannot make up the shortfall in the gas if it's cut off. So anyway, Alex, you jump in here.
Yeah, just to add to what you're saying, no, there's no way, because Germany does not have the liquid natural gas port capacity to bring it in from elsewhere, even either from the Middle East or the U.S. Plus, our natural gas is already committed to being sent to Asia, because the Asian countries, and that includes China, actually, are willing to pay a pretty price to secure their natural gas for basically their economic recovery for the post-COVID. So that there's no give in the international markets either. Again, the gas prices in Germany would go up. It would hurt the government. And that's why Scholz is talking to Macron in France and basically saying, we can't let this conflict happen.
Right. Well, yeah, and the political economy pressures on it are quite profound in terms of constraining the actual exercise of force.
Right.
I know people are talking about how Putin. Well, I know. Let me just finish this comment before we are going to interrupt each other. But let me just finish this one comment. That Putin supposedly has a war chest of about a surplus of about 638 billion. Some estimated as 900 billion. And when they talk about the sanctions regime, the West is sort of organizing. It'll hit about 2% of the GDP. But if Putin is intent on doing something or getting some extraction, because what's clear about this is that if the United States rejects openly his demands, which of course I expected would happen, then it's a question of what's Putin going to do? Because he's up for election. Is he going to be backed up to the wall? I mean, here's how wars can break out. But Michael, come on in with your comments about this. Mike?
Yeah, I'm here. Well, the fact is that there's one thing, I mean, what Germany's doing, what France is doing, what individual countries are doing. I mean, if Germany isn't sending arms, it could be beat up for by other countries. It costs them more money, so they might be pissed off at Germany. But the fact of the matter is that what's happening here, excuse me, what's happening here is that as far as NATO, as far as Ukraine going into NATO, and having all these NATO countries on Russia's border, first of all, we have to say that the agreement, unsigned agreement with Gorbachev was made with Gorbachev. At that time, there was a Soviet Union, or still was effectively there. The situation is different simply because there is no Soviet Union. It's supposedly a different country, that is Russia. As far as the joining of NATO, the problem with Putin, on Putin's end, as far as putting, I understand that Russia certainly wouldn't want every country on its border to be a member of NATO. That doesn't go in, isn't in line with their buffer zone policy, which has some justification from the Second World War. But
well, obviously it does. Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
But Putin, what I understand from Putin's end all this time is that, when it comes to the carrot or the stick, as far as Ukraine, he's never put out the carrot. I mean, he's never actually tried to woo Ukraine. There's kind of this expectation that Ukraine will just do Russia's bidding. But he didn't actually reach out to try to give them a better deal than they could get from being in NATO, to basically give them guarantees, to the kind of like soft power approach, which he hasn't even been trying, which only leads me to believe that much of what his posturing has to do with is as much domestic, if not more so domestic, than it does actually have to do with the Ukraine. But as far as, delaying things, obviously more arms are pouring into Ukraine, and Ukraine has been given more time to build up. Not that it hasn't been already. So postponing things because of the Olympics is not exactly in Russia's interest. It may be necessary for them to do so as not to alienate China. But it just means that if he does anything militarily, it's going to be that much more costly. So I don't know. Again, it all comes down to what Putin's end game is. When somebody says he's holding the cards, I mean, I don't think he just wants respect to get respect. But if the reason he's holding the cards is because he's one of the two countries directly involved. Obviously.
Mike, after all of that dialogue, you can't say, I don't know. What do you think? It can't take that long. I don't know. Come on. What's going to happen? What's going to happen?
Because Ken,
I don't know.
The whole point is, you want me to give you a definitive answer?
Yeah, something.
Sounds like it.
Okay, all right. If you want definitive answers, go join Trump's party.
Okay, great.
Whatever you want to call the Republicans. But the fact of the matter is, there is no definitive answer. And it really comes down to a question. So if you would wait to the end of a sentence, you would have
Okay, what's the question? Come on.
However, but I understand your compulsiveness. The idea is that it really is, we can discuss this, we could, come up with ideas, but whatever Putin's long-term gain, what his primary objective is, and the reason I'm saying I don't know, and I don't think anybody here knows for sure, that will be the deciding factor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Go on, Kenny.
You don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think it's worth it. I wouldn't.
Wait, Ken. If you don't know, then you're not thinking it's worth it. Has no meaning. So
there you go.
Let's
All right. Well, go on. Go on.
No. What I think honestly is Stephen may have a viewpoint on this that's different than saying something's going to happen.
Wait, Ken.
Come on, Mike, it's enough. Let Stephen go. It's enough. I'm muting myself. Bye-bye.
What the hell were you talking about? That's the problem.
Well, anyway, it is difficult to figure out what the hell's going on.
Let's get Stephen.
Because I have other stuff to throw out here. Go on, Steve.
Excuse me. Wait. What about Dennis?
Let's hear. We're gonna get Dennis. We're gonna wake Dennis up in a minute, pretty loudly. Trust me.
How are we gonna do that?
Well, we got Prime Minister's questions. That's pretty loud. Go on, Steve.
I'll just repeat briefly what I said before at great length. I don't know what the interest is, particularly of the United States and some of the Western powers. I think a lot of the Western powers really don't give a blank about this. I think Germany doesn't care. I think France may not care either. We certainly, Spain has sent a few fighter jets, but they probably, I don't think any of them care. I think probably the Baltic states and Romania, they care. But why we should risk war, for their interests is beyond me. And it just comes back to the question that I raised earlier. Why is it important for the Western powers for Ukraine to be in NATO? And this is obviously what it's about. It's not about, well, the Ukrainians as a nation should have the right to join NATO if they want to. No, the Western objective, not the Western, the United States objective, and Blinken has made this very clear. The United States objective is to have Ukraine in NATO. And I haven't figured out, certainly, and maybe others on the program have, some of the very high-level foreign policy experts whose statements we showed earlier, they haven't figured it out either. Why the United States wants Ukraine in NATO.
Richard Haas. Well, one of the things I find ridiculous about. Let me finish my comment here.
Richard States wants.
Mike, let Jim.
How do you know that? Excuse me. How do you know that's the primary objective? I mean, do you have information from?
Well,
that's what they said, Mike.
Well, Richard, look, Richard Haas. Look,
say it's their primary objective.
Well, look, the issue of NATO expansion. We were dealing with this yesterday on the show. The whole notion that it was, let's all like get along and, you can remember there was a point when Yeltsin was approached to join NATO. Yeah. I mean, in his drunken state, because they used to have some hilarious videos of him, stumbling and bumbling as he was high on vodka. But, they actually approached him to join NATO. And there was a serious discussion in the 90s about that. And the United States, as I quoted Mary Surratt's books on this, she basically convincingly demolishes the notion that there was never any, there was always a clear idea that NATO enlargement should happen in the 90s, early 90s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union for all sorts of reasons. Because their attitude was, even if communism is overthrown in the Soviet Union, from a geopolitical view, we still have a state that, and they go back to Tsarist Russia, that will expand. So hence, let's contain them. And Putin, of course, we know, was caught in Germany when the Soviet Union collapsed. He was in Berlin, if I recall. He was somewhere in
Dresden, Jim.
Dresden. He was in Dresden.
He was a KGB liaison.
Right. And he talks about how he has to escape by the seat of his pants. Seat of his pants to get out of there. So that's a pretty scarring memory on Vladimir to think about this. And he's always made a clear comment. I was going to show, and by the way, you're listening to Going Viral, goingviral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman. We have Steve Jonas, Mike Jankowitz, Alex Stavropoulos, Kenny Aaron, and Dennis Goldstein online with us here now. And we're talking about the situation in Ukraine. But let me just, play this.
Wait.
All right.
Because we got Dennis now. I don't know. Let's take advantage of that.
All right, Dennis, your comments about the latest, basically United States.
Europe.
Basically,
Ukraine. Yeah.
The United States has said, you got to unmute, Dennis. The United States has basically rejected completely Putin's demands. So you got to unmute to comment on the latest developments. As we
all right, here you go,
Dennis. Go on, Dennis. So tell us what you think about the latest developments.
I think that the United States is the aggressor. I think that Putin is just expanding his territory, and I think that we ought to stop U.S. foreign policy from carrying out its imperialist aims. Period.
Let me just briefly answer the question. How do I know that the United States wants Ukraine and NATO? It's very simple. Because if that were not the United States' interest, the United States would agree to have the implementation of Minsk II, which did not contemplate Ukraine and NATO, but settle a lot of other stuff, particularly dealing with the autonomy, not the independence, the autonomy of the two Eastern Russian-speaking provinces. So if the United States weren't interested in I'll just repeat this for emphasis. If the United States were not interested in having Ukraine and NATO, it would just say, okay, fine, let's do Minsk II. Minsk II was I just looked it up on Wikipedia, was the product of a lot of negotiations. It's very detailed, and that's what it says. And when
was that?
The question that I had,
2016.
Let me just clarify that question that I had for you. Was, did you have any information that it was the main reason, the main priority? Because that was the impression I was getting from what you're saying. We know.
No, I don't have any. No, I don't have. I have no inside information.
All right. Let me comment on that, Michael.
You just look at what's going on. If you look at what's going on and you look at Blinken being very, very stern about we're not going to give away in any situation Ukraine's right to join NATO. To me, I'm reading that as saying we want Ukraine and NATO. That's how I'm reading it.
Right. Well, look, let me add to this. Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. Minsk 1 is 2014, 2015. Minsk 2 is 2016. Now, one has to start with the shock of the Euromaidan revolt, which again, we don't know the origins of that. That could have definitely been, I'm not going to sit there, I'm not one to sit there and start, going nuts. I'm not Dennis Bernstein in Berkeley. I'm not going to sit there and say, but it could have been very much a covert operation that was implemented and aided by the CIA. Now, one thing that happened in Kyiv was the repression of the demonstrations. There were 5,000 people demonstrating, and then what happened was they deployed about 120 snipers, and those snipers killed a whole bunch of people demonstrating. And then within days, the amount of people
killed police too, Jim.
Well, that's true. But in days, that's where you get it gets
and then
controversial.
there's the stuff from the Italian TV that they were Georgian snipers.
All right. But see, the problem I have with that argument is that, the person who was in charge at the time was someone who was essentially aligned with Putin. And so the demonstrations mushroomed to 500,000 people. And so Putin is faced with a situation where his ally is overthrown. So when you look at the Crimea operation, that was one of, look, guys I know in the special forces look on it as a sort of a model operation, the little green men coming into the Crimea and taking it over. And yes, indeed, I agree with Steve that basically the lease was up. And so they were figuring, my God, we got a volatile situation. We could have a naval base in Sevastopol basically taken over by the West. So Putin decided to act in his national self-interest and pulled off what they themselves call a hybrid warfare, using nonviolence, special forces, etc. Now, what becomes different in this is his situation further north in Luhansk and Donetsk, because that's where you could sort of say, okay, so what really happened up there? Was that just simply, here's where you get into disputes about it. Was it indeed people? Of course, they were reacting to certain units that the Ukrainians militia came in there. These guys were neo-Nazis. They're acting as if they were, sort of tunneling Stefan Bandera. And that's part of what happened. But then what was also clear was when the Ukrainian military mobilized, they had about they were at 50% manning levels and 40% equipment levels.
Jim, you got to throw some dates in there. What
this
is
is 2014, July 2014. So when they start going over to confront the forces that are in Donetsk and Luhansk, and that's pretty clear that the special operations forces of the Russians were getting involved in this right from the start. And then regular formations of the Russian army came in to support them. They are then involved in a full-blown conventional fight. And that keeps going on until the Minsk I agreements. Now, one of the things that happened in Minsk I agreements was that was violated by the separatists in the fighting. Okay, that's one aspect of it. They are generally held responsible for violating the fighting. And also, everybody was taken by surprise by the Ukrainians essentially rallying to fight them. And that's where the issue Steve raises of the United States getting involved starts, because the United States saw this as an opportunity to reinforce an unexpected situation, and they begin sending advisors and others. Wesley Clark goes to that part of the eastern Ukraine in July and June of 2014. Now, fast forward to Minsk II. What happened in Minsk II?
When was Minsk II?
That's 2015. Minsk II was a negotiation. What they talk about is the formula of France, Germany, and Russia and the Ukraine negotiating. Because remember, Macron is always arguing, he was a big advocate to break away from NATO and let's form a French-German alliance. Let's reconstruct our security needs along the lines of the European Union. So Putin's going to go along with that. But what happens in that situation is that by then, there is indeed an acceleration of assets by the Russian military, and indeed an acceleration of reinforcement of the Ukrainians, with Americans getting more involved in training. So when the next phase of fighting occurs, there is indeed Russian military forces being confronted with Ukrainians who are being given assistance by the United States.
Okay,
Now,
wait a minute. Let me point out. All of this is under Obama. It's 2014.
Yeah,
2015.
Obama. That's right. It's under Obama.
So
It's
what
under
was the
Obama.
U.S. policy?
U.S.
Well-
policy was a mixed policy. It was not to it recognized them. It was not to push the magic button of NATO enlargement, because NATO enlargement had already been argued in NATO in 2008 in Bucharest. There was a memorandum issued in 2008 called the Bucharest Memorandum. And what that argued was NATO expansion should include Georgia and the Ukraine. And that's one of the reasons why Putin decides to act in the case of Georgia, because now some say that Georgia initiated the fighting there in 2008, but Putin, of course, reacted very decisively and essentially smacked them down. And people, of course, talk about how Putin then begins to reform the Russian army as a result of the lessons of the Georgian intervention, because there were a whole bunch of screw-ups that occurred in their fighting down there. And so what we're seeing right now is the result of basically 12 to 13 years of reform in the Russian army, which is supposed to be finished in 2021, 2020, 2021. So we're seeing right now a reformed Russian army that has learned its lessons, and essentially has learned its lessons from the United States and the NATO allies in their fighting, particularly in Iraq. But that's what we're seeing. So the NATO expansion gets to the point where de facto NATO expansion has occurred. The Brits are going in there training them. The Americans are going in there training them. They cycle in National Guard units to go train the Ukrainians and work with them. So there's already de facto aid going into the Ukraine by the U.S. military and the British. And so Putin's has this justification to feel like, you guys already going in here, so why should I tolerate this? Now, I'm not going to defend Putin. He's a brutal dictator as far as I'm concerned. But from his point of view, from his perspective, he's seen a political threat that he wants to eliminate now, and he probably feels, based on what's happened in the past 2 years, the internal divisions of the United States. He had 4 years of Trump. Basically, we can argue about this. I know Alex doesn't agree with me. I sort of look on Trump as a ally of Putin. He has a situation where he has a opportunity from his calculation. And so the United States right now is exercising and threatening nuclear war, as he is in retaliation to that, because we're trying to contain the situation and not have him conventionally invade essentially an ally of the West in the Ukraine. And that's how I see it. Anyway.
I would very quickly like to add 2 words to this discussion. Victoria Nuland, because we know that when the revolution in Kiev originally occurred, and a pro-Russian government was replaced by a pro-Western government, Victoria Nuland was caught on tape saying essentially, "Whoopee, we did it."
Yeah, right. Exactly. And then I just want to bring in the whole first.
Wait, just for the ignorati. Okay. Who's Victoria Newton?
She was the Nuland.
She's a neocon.
Not Big Newton. It's Victoria Nuland.
Nuland. Yeah.
Yeah, she was
the ambassador.
Assistant. She was assistant secretary of state, either for European or Eastern Europe.
Well, whose side is she on? Obama?
She's married to Robert Kagan of the Kagan family. That is, that are neocons par excellence.
So she's a Republican.
They're people for a new American century. The people who are like, oh, we need a new Pearl Harbor to.
But wait a minute. You said she's a neocon, which she was a diplomat. She's a diplomat.
She was the
she's a hawk.
Secretary of State, I believe, for European affairs, and she was caught on tape after the revolution originally occurred in Kiev, saying to a counterpart in the European Union, essentially,
Steve, it was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine who she said it to.
Yeah. Oh, okay. She said, "Whoopee." Essentially. She said, "Whoopee, we did it."
But who is she working for? Who is she really working
for? Obama,
Assistant Secretary of State.
She's working for Obama. Obama appointed her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obama went along with this. Obama, to say that Obama accepted what happened. I mean, he made a foreign policy decision to go along with and take advantage of what happened. Now, whether they were involved in actually overthrowing them or not, I remember that comment. I do not put it past the CIA to get involved in that kind of stuff. When I talked to Colonel David Glantz, who is at this point the premier expert on the Russian army in our country, he basically said to me, Jim, come on, the CIA, they're not sitting on their asses. They're pretty busy for the past 15 to 20 years. So, and he actually left the army because he was angry over in 93. He decided to retire because he was angry over the fact that he saw these kind of trends going on, that we were essentially deceiving the Russians. And he was very angry about that. And he also was angry. He also was angry about how they were screwing up on counterterrorism. He saw that in 93 as a real problem because the White House took control of counterterrorism, and we know what happened with that. We know how well they were prepared to predict 9/11. So, but anyway, yeah, but yeah. So it's de facto an alliance with the Ukrainians, and that's what's Wesley Clark. I mean, there's a guy named Philip Carver who was an undersecretary of defense in the Reagan administration. This guy's gone back and forth to the Ukrainian military 30 times. All right. 30 times. He's gone to the front lines, and he gives a talk at West Point in 2018. I recommend everybody hear it. It's a very powerful talk because he's sitting there talking about the actual fighting going on between the Ukrainians and the Russians, which is quite intense. There was one series of battles where there was, I was sort of stunned, several hundred tanks and armored vehicles of the Ukrainian army plus artillery destroyed by the Russians. All right. And at one point he said the amount of expenditure of ammunition going on there is equal to both Iraq and Afghanistan combined in terms of conventional ammunition being expended. Okay. So we're talking about an intensive war that has never stopped. And now we're just seeing an expansion of it in this latest situation.
Okay, but what you're alluding to the concept
wait a second, Ken.
I just want to ask one question, Mike, and I'll go to you. You're alluding to the fact that Obama, the Clintons, they're behind this support of a belligerent state against Russia, the Ukraine.
Absolutely correct.
It's bipartisan policy.
Come on. It's bipartisan.
It's bipartisan. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but see, of course, the Democrats are not as wacky as the Republicans right now. I mean, look at what the Republicans are doing. What's that jerk in Georgia?
Look.
Oh, let's go to Mike. Come on, Mike.
Wait. Let me just finish this.
I hope they're not. People here aren't trying to paint Obama as a right winger, because that would negate the efficacy of this show whatsoever. Okay.
No, Mike. We're on foreign policy. He's just following the usual U.S. imperialist.
Yeah, all right.
He's
but
an
the idea is that
you're not saying
he's taking a right-wing policy. In other words, he's taking a right-wing stance on this.
It's not right-wing. It's bipartisan.
No, it's not right-wing. It's just what is perceived as American self-interest. That's all.
Well, if that's the case,
Truman. If you're going to say that, you're going to say Truman. Truman believed the same kind of stuff.
We have to examine the possibility that if it's bipartisan, that there might be some reason or logic to it. That it may not just be
it's permanent dominance of the entire planet by the United States.
I know, Alex,
that's what we've always wanted.
I know, Alex, that Russia can do no wrong and America can do no right, and that whatever Russia's paying you isn't enough. But the fact of the matter is,
it's in our documents, Mike. Full spectrum dominance. Full spectrum dominance.
Whatever's in our documents doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, just by the fact that America, if both the Obama administration, if every administration has been doing it, there obviously is a pretty good reason for it. And the fact you may not agree with that reason, but the idea is it's a pretty good reason, and it's not just some evil, mass conspiracy. I mean, what Putin is doing, he has his logical reasons, and we have ours.
Michael, one could argue, I mean, I attended at Yale today. I was by Zoom. I attended a very interesting conversation on the early and mid 50s internal politics of the Republic of South Vietnam. Now, that was a bipartisan policy. The Democrats and the Republicans were in favor of setting up, and we know the history of the Vietnam War and also the foreign policy of the Cold War. Now, if one is actually saying that there is a bipartisan unity or I mean, obviously now I wouldn't call it unified in terms of response of the GOP and the Democrats. I mean, Tucker Carlson, if you look at Tucker, it was funny, Playthell Benjamin was telling me today that he sort of agreed with Tucker Carlson when he was sort of talking about his take on the Ukraine. And I was mentioning Marjorie Taylor Greene. She believes that Biden's supporting the Ukraine because he wants to keep the Hunter Biden scandal out of the picture. Now that's absolutely ridiculous. All right, absolutely ridiculous. But I mean, the interest of the United States is, yes, we want to contain geopolitically a power that we view as hostile. So that, I mean, and that was what was clear in the early 90s, because if you look at it from purely geopolitical terms, it has nothing to do with communism. I mean, and I think that Putin's a communist dictator? No, he's not. He's not a communist dictator. He is a authoritarian dictator of a state that is looking at our presence on its border as a potential threat. And that's how they're acting. And that's how we're going to act in response. We're going to defend it. And so this is what's so scary about it. A Cuban Missile Crisis, except on the borders of Russia.
Okay, great. So, okay, Mike, unmute. How'd you get muted, Mike? Come on, unmute. Mike's got to answer. Oh, there we go. Come on.
Well, somebody muted me, but the idea is that must have been you, Ken, and your.
I'm just trying to support the conversation. Go ahead, Mike.
Right. The idea is that there is a logic to the situation, and if there's a logic on both sides, and if there's a logic on both sides, and it's not just fanaticism or ideology or anything like that, but there's a logic on both sides, it's going to be a difficult situation to diffuse, because each side can justify their actions based on their own needs, their own, I don't want to say logistical, but logical worldviews, their own logical assessments of the situation. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a difficult situation to untangle. That's basically what I'm saying. Now, the fact of the matter is, as far as Ukraine goes, I mean, if you look at it in basic terms, does Russia have a right to invade Ukraine? No. Okay, they don't have a right to invade Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to make its own self-determination. But as far as these other factors, as far as NATO, whether Ukraine is going into NATO, what the security arrangements are going to be done in the region, these things will be much more difficult to untangle. And that basically comes back to the same idea: is what are Putin's priorities?
Okay, great. All right, hey, Jim, do the world a favor. Move us on to another topic, because we're not getting anywhere with this, and I don't think we will, because we'll see what happens. Hey, good old Boris Johnson. We don't hear we're not hearing the audio, Mike, Jim.
The final question, Senator Minister Tony on the outset.
Mr. Speaker.
Lost the sound, Jim.
Did you mute her on purpose? Something that she's saying you don't want to hear?
No, he didn't mute her on purpose.
Jim, we're not hearing it.
Out for certainty. So when will this government finally bake off and deliver a veterinary agreement?
pomposity. Everybody's very pompous.
Position front bench. As you say, John Lady, it's good to see her finally supporting the UK government, which Labour failed to do, while we are focused on delivering for Northern Ireland, rectifying the protocol, fixing the problem. Get on board!
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We start with Prime Minister's questions. Kettle.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, remarked to the House earlier this morning, this Sunday marks a tragic day in our history. This was one of the darkest days of the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, and I echo his call to learn from the past, to reconcile and build a shared, peaceful and prosperous future. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
I associate my remarks with the Prime Minister on Bloody Sunday. Did the Prime Minister agree to the Chancellor of the Exchequer writing off £4.3 billion of fraud? That's £154 of every household in the country. That went directly into the pockets of fraudsters.
No, of course not, Mr. Speaker. But what I can tell him, we do not support fraudsters or those who steal from the public purse, Mr. Speaker. But what I can tell her is that everybody in this country should be very proud of the huge effort that was made by Lord Agnew and others to secure ventilators and to secure PPE. And at the time, Captain Hindsight and others were calling for us to go faster, Mr. Speaker.
Craig Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My local hospital, the George Eliot, has recently issued all of its staff, helpers and volunteers with a medal in recognition of the work that they've done and continue to do through the COVID pandemic. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking them all for the incredible work they've done, including the specialist teams such as palliative care, who've had to act as surrogate families for patients whose relatives who've been able to attend because of restrictions? And will he consider following their lead in issuing a National Service Medal for all of our key workers who've done such an outstanding job in keeping our country going through the pandemic?
Prime Minister.
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend, and I'm pleased that so many of the volunteers and the staff at George Eliot Hospital have been recognised in the Queen's New Year's honours list. I've seen the medal that they are proposing, and I think it's lovely, Mr. Speaker. And as I've told the House before, we're establishing a UK Commission on COVID commemoration to consider how we can commemorate everything that we've all been through, and the Commission will also consider how we can recognise the courage of frontline workers.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I join with the Prime Minister in his comments in relation to Bloody Sunday? The Ministerial Code says that ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. Does the Prime Minister believe that applies to him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, but let me tell the House that I think he's inviting a question about an investigation which, as you know, Mr. Speaker, I can't comment, and on which he, as a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, will know that I can't comment on. And what I am focused on is delivering the fastest recovery of any European economy from COVID. The fastest booster rollout, 400,000 more people on the payrolls now than there were before the pandemic began. And we're launching a policy tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. He talks about people being out of work. In my case, that's what I understand why he wants it. We're launching a plan tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, to get 500,000 people off welfare into work. It's a fantastic idea. I hope he supports it.
Keir Starmer.
I think the Prime Minister said yes, he agrees the code does apply to him. And therefore, if he misled Parliament, he must resign.
Yes.
On the 1st of December, the Prime Minister told this House, in relation to parties during lockdown, all guidance was followed completely in number 10 from that dispatch box. Yeah. On the 8th of December, looks quizzical, he said it. On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged there was no party. So since he acknowledges the ministerial code applies to him, will he now resign?
No, Mr. Speaker. But you know, since he asks about COVID restrictions, let me just remind the House, and indeed remind the country, that he has been relentlessly opportunistic throughout. He has flip-flopped from one side to the other. He would have kept us in lockdown in the summer, Mr. Speaker. He would have taken us back into lockdown at Christmas, Mr. Speaker. And it's precisely because we didn't listen to Captain that we have the fastest growing economy in the G7, Mr. Speaker, and we have got all the big calls right.
The guy that said in hindsight he now appreciates it was a party. We've discovered the real Captain Hindsight, haven't we, Mr. Speaker?
Where's the party at?
Let me spell out the... Let me spell out... They shout now. They're going to have to go out and defend some of this nonsense. Let me spell out the significance of yesterday's developments. Sue Gray...
Hey, Jim, can I pause and ask you a question? Jim, what is this? Are they debating what to do about Ukraine?
No.
So,
just
they're all condemning themselves. That we're going to stand here and argue about, you know.
He's now talking about Partygate.
Yeah, Partygate, right.
Okay.
It's just like, you know, embarrassing. Who farted? You know, that's all. Which one of the guys in the elevator passed wind? I mean, this is really juvenile. I don't care how good their articulation far surpasses anything I could accomplish.
I will say,
pointless. Go ahead.
I will say one thing. God help me for defending Johnson. No, but one thing. One of the photos they took. This doesn't go for the other parties, but one of the photos that they took of him going maskless, but in an outdoor setting. The fact that it was outdoors probably mitigates mitigates his guilt there to some degree. However, he has the other parties to worry about. There was a Christmas party. I don't think it's any one incident that they're arguing about that Johnson did. It's a pattern of incidents that he was doing where he was ignoring his own protocols.
I think if they had any real arguments, they would have brought him up, rather than saying he's a buffoon or he's impolite.
Well, they did bring it up.
What policies?
He lied to Parliament.
They're waiting for a report which will come tomorrow from the civil servant who is responsible for investigating such allegations. And they're yelling back and forth at each other, you know, trying to fill up the time until a woman named Sue Gray reports to the House tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Jim, Alex, do you have another video you want to play?
Yeah, I actually have one that I wanted Steve to comment on.
Okay, go ahead, put it up.
Because it's science related. It's the CIA admitting Havana syndrome is basically
contradiction.
The CIA admitting what, Alex?
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. Dennis wants to talk about something.
No, I think Dennis is talking to somebody else.
Oh, he is? Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Alex, just before you play this, the CIA admitted what?
They admitted that the people who allegedly are suffering from Havana syndrome, they can't. Most of the cases were not the result of some kind of weird sonic or microwave weapon from any foreign power, and they kind of imply that it's some kind of mass hysteria, psychosomatic illness.
Wait, Alex, are you actually siding with the CIA?
Well, no, I'm actually the CIA is the one who promulgated this hoax in the first place.
That would be
just
amazing.
now there's no evidence, so they now have to admit that they made the whole thing up.
CIA, you would be a CIA asset.
Well,
maybe without the EP, I don't know.
Let's see what the data is. Let's run the video.
So this is from CBS, their national channel.
You got the sound connected, right?
Cases of mysterious neurological illness known as Havana syndrome were not caused by a foreign adversary.
Gazis was one of a handful of reporters briefed on the report yesterday, and she joins us now with some new details. So, Olivia, Anne-Marie and I were talking about this earlier. We were sort of scratching our heads about this. So just for context, explain to our viewers, when did the first instances of Havana syndrome occur, and what were those symptoms that people experienced?
Sure. So the public has been aware of this thing called Havana syndrome since at least 2016, which is when U.S. diplomats and intelligence officers who were stationed at the U.S. Embassy in Havana, Cuba, first started reporting feeling ill. Canadians were among that group too. And the symptoms can vary, but they include things like nausea, dizziness, these really intense headaches, cognitive difficulties. And they tend to be preceded by this sensation of feeling heat or pressure in your head. And some victims have even said that they could sort of step off the X or leave a room and make those feelings subside. So the mystery of those symptoms was unexplained for a while, but they didn't garner a ton of attention until more started being reported. So in 2018, there was a spate of cases in China. And then over the past year, we've seen them be reported in Serbia, Colombia, Austria, Vietnam, India, including some cases here on U.S. soil that have been reported. And so that really got the attention of the agencies where personnel were feeling sick and ultimately of the federal government. So early on in this administration, the Biden administration launched this big multi-agency effort to encourage employees who suspect that they have had these symptoms to report those cases. And they've been crunching all of those numbers and really importantly, connecting some of these people who have been feeling so sick to medical diagnosis and care.
Okay, so that's interesting because I think sort of early on, and you can verify my faulty memory, the State Department had looked into it, and that's when we first started hearing this hypothesis of sort of this is like invisible energy weapon or something like that. And so the call goes out, if anyone has any of these symptoms, we want to hear about it. And the CIA does a more formal report. Is that what we're seeing the results of?
Yeah, so there's a lot of nuances in this interim report, and it's very much worth parsing because I know there's a lot of confusion around this. So the CIA has approached this from an intelligence standpoint, right? And so based on an analysis of these now 1,000 plus cases that have been reported by U.S. personnel, they've said that it is unlikely that there is an adversary or other nation state, including Russia, which had been sort of the informal, unofficial prime suspect in a lot of these cases, that it is unlikely that it is waging some sort of mass global campaign secretly targeting U.S. officials with weaponry or some other technology. In the majority of these 1,000 cases that have been reported, there are alternative explanations, other medical, pre-existing medical conditions, environmental factors attributable to something else. In a smaller subset of those, they're not explained, but are not going to be, for one reason or another, an area of continued focus, at least for the intelligence community. And then there is this small subset of roughly 24 cases that the CIA is now saying they are going to intensively focus on because there's something about those cases that that they can't understand. They can't attribute to another medical condition or environmental factor. And they also, very importantly, can't rule out that there is a foreign adversary or weapon at play. And so while the Russians might be feeling some sense of vindication, hearing that this mass campaign is unlikely from their perspective, they're not entirely off the hook because intelligence agencies have not ruled out sort of one-off or opportunistic attacks among the officials who have reported these symptoms in these 24 cases. The door is still open there.
Right. So what about the dozen or so unexplained cases? What's up with those?
Right. So we don't know a ton about them. All that we know from the officials who briefed us yesterday is that they affect CIA personnel and U.S. officials from other government agencies. We don't know when they happened, and we don't know where they happened. But the officials that we spoke with yesterday said that they're posing a real challenge, partly because there's sort of no commonalities among them. It's not as though all of these people worked Russia issues, had a common portfolio, or that they all traveled to the same place, or that they all ate the same food. There's just no pattern to the data that they can detect in these 24 cases. So they're effectively now going to recrunch these numbers, turn around the stones again 360 degrees to see if they can unearth something new. They're going to continue collecting intelligence to see if these particular cases can help them create new leads that will explain what is at play here.
And some of these people have described some pretty debilitating symptoms that in some cases even linger after they've left the location where they've been working for the State Department. I'm wondering how they're reacting to the CIA's assertion that, a large portion of them were just kind of, regular health problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a really tough and emotional and highly personal issue for a lot of these people who have been struggling with, in some cases, really debilitating symptoms and have felt really misunderstood and maligned for a long time. They worry, frankly, that, they're perceived as off or as, wanting money from the government or something. But they're really...
Well, you pretty much got the thing. They don't. I should mention again that before all this, there's an internal U.S. government organization called JASON that it's an acronym for I forget what exactly, but which includes a number of scientists. They had also looked at Havana syndrome, and they were focused on the idea that this was some kind of mass hysteria. That it was basically these people were having psychos. They were believing
Alex,
that they were under attack and that it was all in their heads.
Were these? They talked about a couple of thousand cases. Were the vast majority of these cases from the State Department, or did they affect people in other aspects?
Again, other CIA, they haven't specifically said. They've only mentioned the State Department and the CIA, I think, so far. But there are other that they have other, government organizations they haven't mentioned.
But is it only government organizations? I mean, this is really a medical problem, and why they're not approaching it as a medical problem. What about people from outside of the government? Do they have any record of any?
Well, no. Again, there have been scientists out. There have been peer-reviewed papers, and they've talked about things like because some of the U.S. officials, they recorded what they thought were the sounds that were causing the problems, and again in Cuba specifically, and they were able to filter out the background sound, and they were determined that it was a particular cricket that's native to Cuba that was making again the sound. So, which again it's one of the louder crickets in the world. So that was one explanation, at least for some of the cases in Cuba, that what they were a bunch of loud crickets that were driving them nuts, essentially.
No. But what I'm asking is, have there been a lot of recorded cases from non-government officials? In other words, have people?
No, I don't. I mean, I've been seeing the only cases that they talk about are so I think some Canadians and some U.S. government people. So nobody. They haven't reported American businessmen having these same symptoms or anything like that.
No, but I'm saying if somebody in Moline, Illinois, or something like that.
No, nothing like that.
So there's no medical. I mean, have they even tried to find out if this is a medical issue that goes beyond that affects?
Well, part of the problem again is this happened in different countries.
Wait a minute. The source of this report, what we just watched,
was
the CIA.
Yeah. Well, but we have a medical expert. Come on. So I'll throw it to Steve. What thoughts do you have hearing of
20 here?
Well, but Steve is a medical professional, so he probably has a bit more knowledge than the rest of us, I would say.
Yeah. Let's get it from Steve. Come on, Steve.
Just a bit. I can't say this is something that I studied in medical school.
Yeah.
But and as just about everybody in this program knows, I was not a clinician. I was in preventive medicine, academic side. But the question that occurs to me about this, and I would imagine that the CIA looked for it, is did this happen in nationals of any other country? Would you know the answer to that question, Alan?
There are a few Canadians who also have reported.
Other than Canadians in U.S.
No, at least none that have been reported.
Yeah. Well, boy, I tell you, I don't have anything to add to this. Sorry. I know much more about what's going on in Ukraine than I do with this.
Right.
Well, no, but it's an interesting question because, I mean, in other words, the CIA is investigating those people within the CIA's quote unquote jurisdiction, within the State Department, CIA personnel. But what if this is affecting some guy who works in a hardware store in Indianapolis, or somebody in France who works on a farm?
I mean,
something like
so
that.
far I haven't heard anything like that, Mike. So people in the government.
If that's the case, then it isn't just a medical situation. If it's only affecting U.S. and some Canadian government personnel, then obviously.
But the other thing is nobody can figure out what kind of, all the physical and reported evidence. Essentially, it can't be a microwave weapon, which again some people have theorized. It could be. People talk about weird stuff like so-called directed energy weapons, but nobody knows if those actually exist. So it's like a science fiction, It's
but it's not.
Nobody knows it's even possible to do what they claim these weapons.
No, but something is going on, and if all it affects is U.S. and some Canadian government and intelligence personnel, then that would make one suspicious that something is.
But it also could be, again, people point to essentially a case of mass hysteria that people convincing themselves that they're under attack.
All right, no. I mean, some of these people are having
something like the Salem witch trial kind. People.
Some of these people are having serious symptoms. I mean, we really. Then we'd have to look at it and find out if the State Department and CIA are focusing on hiring only people with severe mental instability. I mean, which they may be. I don't know. But the fact is that when you have something that's only affecting people in one profession or in one area, then you have to, in other words, that makes you suspicious. That should lead you to investigate something. It doesn't denude the possibility that it is being done, human control directed at them on purpose. It just means they've ruled out the possibility that it's a microwave type of weapon.
Or directed energy. This is the only other thing it could be. Then you're essentially saying, well, there's some weapon that we have no idea how it's working, and
there's a lot we don't know. But however, I'm not saying it is a weapon or it isn't, but it is suspicious if it is only affecting people in these professions, in these organizations.
Well, there again, some of the report, scientific papers about this from outside the government have expressed skepticism because they're basically the people are reporting their own symptoms. So they're like, are these people, are they, because there's not a lot of, in terms of somebody having like an MRI or CT scan and them seeing physically changes in the person's brain. There is very little of that. So there, if again, you can't have something physical changing in the person, it could be something totally in someone's head. And connected to real reality. I mean, it's certainly not something you can prove is actually happening in that case.
Alex, though, these are people in different countries. The idea of mass hysteria sounds very, very far-fetched. But what really should be happening is, rather than a CIA investigation, this should be a medical probe.
Oh, yeah. Again, there have been some
going around, and you would have medical personnel look into it and find out the nature of the illness. I mean, we wouldn't have the CIA investigate COVID-19.
Right. Yeah.
The CIA investigated. So,
okay.
It's
that's an interesting. Well,
okay. I'd like to throw up. This is a topic most of you guys will have some input on, and let me just throw this map up. It's about the effects of recent, there it comes, redistricting.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God.
Okay, so according to this article, since we took, I'll just read it fast. Since we last took stock of redistricting in early December, 8 more states, including some of the biggest and swingiest states in the country, have finalized their congressional maps for the next 10 years. In all, 26 states have completed the congressional redistricting, and 128 have, okay, and so forth. And the Democrats, 5 are bluer, and 119. Let's see. No, this is where I wanted to read. The net gain of 7 Democrat-leaning seats over the old maps in those states, while the number of Republican-leaning seats has increased only by 1, since the old House map and had 208 Republican-leaning seats and 181 Democrat-leaning seats overall. All that means redistricting is chipped away, though certainly not erased, Republicans' structural advantage in House elections. So just looking at this with the innocence of a child, you can see that what's happened between the new maps and the old maps is they've increased the nonpartisan seats. So the right, the blue and the red are pushed out.
It should be a good thing because,
yeah,
that means more ability for the population to express their actual preference than,
Right. So, okay. So have you been following this at all, Alex? Do you have any comments?
Well, just in general, again, I mean, we knew, 2020 is a census year. And, and of course, all the different, a little bit here and there about the different court cases that I know about some of these states, but I know some states, their maps are basically being questioned. I think maybe Georgia and at least, particularly, again, Republican states. So that may change, the courts may basically decide, throw out and have a nonpartisan redistricting that will be, fairer to, to both sides, but basically that means fairer to the Democrats because, these are red states we're talking about.
Okay, so, hey, Jim, are you still with us?
Well, let me just say one thing in here.
Go ahead, Mike.
To go back, that if indeed, the Republicans have been pushing for this kind of, for their gerrymandering style redistricting. So if it actually came up with more in favor, or even slightly more in favor of the Democrats, I think that would fall into the category of poetic justice. As far as Republicans, but I'm sure Republicans now will be.
Well, it's a demographic shift, of course. I think.
Right now, I'm sure the Republicans are going to be saying, after all their push to, be able to redistrict according to their own demands, now they're going to be saying, "Oh, we did it wrong. We want to do it over." Right.
The unfortunate thing is, it may not help the Democrats, coming up in 2022. Because I was seeing one poll that Biden is ahead only by 1 point with Hispanics, which obviously that suggests a real shellacking, to use Obama's term about, I think, 2010.
Well,
so it's looks looking like a big Republican win this year in the congressional election.
Which means the Supreme Court nominee. Which really is
well, that's going to happen. With they ended the filibuster there, so the Democrats can push Breyer's successor through regardless.
Right.
So that's certain. That's probably why they're doing it now, and it's what they should have done with Ginsburg.
I'm sure. Well, again,
they shouldn't have let her stick around. They should have had her step down in 2010. When Obama could have replaced her.
Alex, you can't, it's not a matter of letting her stick around or something. Short of blackmail.
Well, if necessary, Obama should have. She had cancer 4 times. So it was, pretty good odds she was gonna, kill her.
He couldn't force her to step down. So
Well, he could have. He didn't try to get her to.
Oh, he did. He had lunch with her, in case you don't remember.
Lunch.
He had a very long lunch with her in which but Obama did what you should say is the ethical thing, which is that he tried to convince her or persuade her. And then he said, but he wasn't going to, do a Lyndon Johnson and twist her arm. He respected her right to make her own decision in the end. So I don't think on an ethical basis how you can fault.
It's politics. It has nothing to do with ethics.
Personal privilege.
The Supreme Court is supposed to be, it no longer is, but it was designed to be above politics. And maybe you can.
Only in people's fantasies, Mike. It's always been.
It's never been.
As Jonathan told us when we had the discussions about the court.
Yes, well, we know that, and we know for certain it definitely no longer is. It was always problematic there. But you can't fault Obama for after trying to persuade her or trying to throw up arguments why she should, if she still held to her decision that she was going to hang on, you can't fault him from not saying, look, if you don't, for resorting to blackmail or something like that, you can't fault him for being a decent person about it.
No, I don't blame him. I blame Michelle. You gotta look. For like 2 years, they couldn't get Gorsuch approved by the Republicans. And, they were obstinate and stubborn. And they said, no, Garland, whoever it was.
You're Garland, yeah.
Garland. Yeah. And they, and Obama, he's a sweetheart. He's a nice guy. I don't want to raise my voice. I don't want anybody getting angry at me. So, there's the consequences.
No, I don't agree with that at all. These are politicians. Let me hear what Steve has to say. And I think the subject at hand is redistricting, not whether Garland or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And this is a serious issue because this is why the sabotage of the Election Reform Act is so decisive. But go on, Steve. What do you think about all this?
I think if it turns out that the Republicans have had a temporary setback this year, which the map that was put up by Alex showed us.
Ken put it up, actually. Give him credit.
I'll put it up for a second. Go ahead.
Oh, Ken put it up. Yeah. They will view this as a temporary setback. The Republicans have been on this track at least going back to 2007, when with Koch brothers money, they invented something called the American Legislative Exchange Council, the purpose of which was...
wait, Steve, that goes back much earlier, Alec. That goes back to the 90s. But yeah, they had we're going to get a little vulgar here. They called it the rat fuck operation for the 2010 census. Well, the Republicans took over a bunch of state legislatures so that they could deliberately redistrict things in their favor, and it worked. It was a good.
Exactly. Really could I just continue for a minute or two? That Alex is quite correct. I thought Alec itself, not Alex, went back to 2007, but the first proposal by Republicans, by a Republican-associated organization, to implement what we are now seeing in terms of redistricting goes back to 1989. It was proposed by an organization called the 15% Solution, and they proposed a program that would reduce the popular vote primarily by going after minorities. They called it the 15% solution because they said if we can get, we always have 15% of the electorate who are totally allied with the Christian nationalism. If we can get the total population voting down to 30%, then we're always going to win. It was called the 15% solution. One thing that it became that very few people have heard of was the title of a book that I published in 1996 called The 15% Solution, which predicted what would happen if, among other things, the 15% solution was implemented. Unfortunately, I do have to say that a lot of the elements that I predicted have come to pass. I do want to make one comment on the Supreme Court and the role of the Supreme Court that I have made before, but it's worth making again. In the Constitution, there is no provision in Article 3 for the Supreme Court having jurisdiction over the decisions and actions of the other two branches of government. This is something that was completely invented by John Marshall in the decision Marbury versus Madison in 1803, and then several subsequent decisions of the Supreme Court. I think it's important. It's just historical. I mean, the Supreme Court obviously has the power they have. But if you talk about constitutional government, folks, it ain't in the Constitution.
Right.
Well, I'm not muted, right? Okay, Steve, please clarify that.
I'm going to say goodnight.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Steve.
All right, good night,
I'll see
Steve.
you all next week.
Thank you,
Okay.
Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good night. Good night, Steve. By the way, I just wanted to throw in two minor points. For one about the International Holocaust Remembrance Day is that again, one of the there was another poll done by a Canadian group in which they determined that over half of I guess millennials do not know the number, or put it this way, do not know the extent of the Holocaust, and about a third don't even know nothing about the Holocaust. So basically, the thrust on for tomorrow supposedly is going to be on Holocaust education, especially since we've only got so many survivors left for so long. And on a lighter note, there was a story. So just you wanted a scientific story. So here's one that should give you pause. There is a new scientific theory that octopuses are from outer space.
Okay.
So to let you know, just in case you have any dealings with octopuses in the near future.
Oh.
All right.
Well, we're all descended from bacteria from outer space.
All right. Well, thank you. It's great to hear the great expertise of all these people who don't like to get involved in Democratic Party, period, to try to get people out to vote. It's always fun to hear that kind of analysis of the question of the voting issues in the United States. That was a lot of fun. All right. Anyway. You've been listening to Going Viral, GoingViral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman. This is the January 26th edition. And we had on air Dennis Goldstein, Steve Jonas, Mike Jankowitz, Alex Stavropoulos, and Ken Aaron in California. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.
Well, you pretty much got the thing. They don't. I should mention again that before all this, there's an internal U.S. government organization called JASON that it's an acronym for I forget what exactly, but which includes a number of scientists. They had also looked at Havana syndrome, and they were focused on the idea that this was some kind of mass hysteria, that it was basically these people were having psychos. They were believing
Alex,
that they were under attack and that it was all in their heads.
Were these? They talked about a couple of thousand cases. Were the vast majority of these cases from the State Department, or did they affect people in other aspects?
Again, other CIA, they haven't specifically said. They've only mentioned the State Department and the CIA, I think, so far. But there are they have other, government organizations they haven't mentioned.
But is it only is it only government organizations? I mean, this is really a medical problem, and why they're not approaching it as a medical problem. What about people from outside of the government? Do they have any record of any?
Oh,
other
well, no. Again, there have been scientists out. There have been peer-reviewed papers, and they've talked about things like because some of the U.S. officials, they recorded what they thought were the sounds that were causing the problems, and again in Cuba specifically, and they were able to filter out the background sound, and they were determined that it was a particular cricket that's native to Cuba that was making again the sound. So, which again it's one of the louder crickets in the world. So that was one explanation, at least for some of the cases in Cuba, that what they were a bunch of loud crickets that were driving them nuts, essentially.
No, but what I'm asking is, have there been a lot of recorded cases from non-government officials? In other words, have people?
No, I don't. I mean, I've been seeing the only cases that they talk about are so I think some Canadians and some U.S. government people. So nobody. They've reported American businessmen having these same symptoms or anything like that.
No, but I'm saying if somebody in Moline, Illinois, or something like that.
No, nothing like that.
So there's no medical. I mean, have they even tried to find out if this is a medical issue that goes beyond that affects?
Well, part of the problem again is this happened in different countries.
Wait a minute. The source of this report, what we just watched,
was
the CIA.
Yeah. Well, but we have a medical expert. Come on. So I'll throw it to Steve. What thoughts do you have hearing of
20 here?
Well, but Steve is a medical professional, so he probably has a bit more knowledge than the rest of us, I would say.
Yeah. Let's get it from Steve. Come on, Steve.
Just a bit. I can't say this is something that I studied in medical school.
Yeah.
But and as just about everybody in this program knows, I was not a clinician. I was in preventive medicine, academic side. But the question that occurs to me about this, and I would imagine that the CIA looked for it, is did this happen in nationals of any other country? Would you know the answer to that question, Alan?
There are a few Canadians who also have reported.
Other than Canadians and U.S.?
No, at least none that have been reported.
Yeah. Well, boy, I tell you, I don't have anything to add to this. Sorry. I know much more about what's going on in Ukraine than I do with this.
Right.
Well, no, but it's an interesting question because, I mean, in other words, the CIA is investigating those people within the CIA's quote unquote jurisdiction, within the State Department, CIA personnel. But what if this is affecting some guy who works in a hardware store in Indianapolis, or somebody in France who works on a farm?
I mean, so far I haven't heard anything like that, Mike. So people in the government.
If that's the case, then it isn't just a medical situation. If it's only affecting U.S. and some Canadian government personnel, then obviously.
But the other thing is nobody can figure out what kind of all the physical and reported evidence. Essentially, it can't be a microwave weapon, which again some people have theorized. It could be. People talk about weird stuff like so-called directed energy weapons, but nobody knows if those actually exist. So it's like a science fiction, It's
but it's not.
Nobody knows it's even possible to do what they claim these weapons.
But something is going on, and if all it affects is U.S. and some Canadian government and intelligence personnel, then that would make one suspicious that something is.
But it also could be, again, people point to essentially a case of mass hysteria that, people convincing themselves that they're under attack.
All right. No. I mean, some of these people are having
something like, the Salem witch trial kind of, people.
Some of these people are having serious symptoms. I mean, we really, then we'd have to look at it and find out if the State Department and CIA are focusing on hiring only people with severe mental instability. I mean, which they may be, I don't know. But the fact is that when you have something that's only affecting people in one profession or in one area, then you have to, in other words, that makes you suspicious. That should lead you to investigate something. It doesn't denude the possibility that it is being done, human control directed at them on purpose. It just means they've ruled out the possibility that's a microwave type of weapon.
Or directed energy. There's the only other thing it could be. Then you're essentially saying, well, there's some weapon that we have no idea how it's working, and
there's
etc.
a lot we don't know. But however, I'm not saying it is a weapon or it isn't, but it is suspicious if it is only affecting people in these professions,
right,
in these organizations.
Well, there again, some of the report, scientific papers about this from outside the government have expressed skepticism because they're basically the people are reporting their own symptoms. So they're like, are these people, are they? Because there's not a lot of, in terms of somebody having like an MRI or CT scan and them seeing physically changes in the person's brain. There is very little of that. So there, if again, you can't have something physical changing in the person, it could be something totally in someone's head. And
well,
connected to real reality. I mean, it's certainly not something you can prove is actually happening in that case.
Alex, though, these are people in different countries. The idea of mass hysteria sounds very, very far-fetched. But what really should be happening is, rather than a CIA investigation, this should be a medical probe.
Oh, yeah. Again, there have been some
going around, and you would have medical personnel look into it and find out the nature of the illness. I mean, we wouldn't have the CIA investigate COVID-19.
Right. Yeah.
The CIA investigated. So,
okay.
It's
that's an interesting. Well,
okay. I'd like to throw up. This is a topic most of you guys will have some input on, and let me just throw this map up. It's about the effects of recent. There it comes. Redistricting.
Oh yeah. Oh God.
Okay, so according to this article, since we took, I'll just read it fast. Since we last took stock of redistricting in early December, 8 more states, including some of the biggest and swingiest states in the country, have finalized their congressional maps for the next 10 years. In all, 26 states have completed the congressional redistricting, and 128 have, and so forth. And the Democrats, 5 are bluer, and 119. Let's see. No, this is where I wanted to read. The net gain of 7 Democrat-leaning seats over the old maps in those states, while the number of Republican-leaning seats has increased only by 1, since the old House map and had 208 Republican-leaning seats and 181 Democrat-leaning seats overall. All that means redistricting is chipped away, though certainly not erased, Republicans' structural advantage in House elections. So just looking at this with the innocence of a child, you can see that what's happened between the new maps and the old maps is they've increased the nonpartisan seats. So the right, the blue and the red are pushed out.
It should be a good thing because
yeah,
that means more ability for the population to express their actual preference than
Right. So have you been following this at all, Alex? Do you have any comments?
Well, just in general. Again, I mean, we knew 2020 is a census year, and and of course all the different, a little bit here and there about the different court cases that some. I know about some of these states, but I know some states, their maps are basically being questioned. I think maybe Georgia in at least, particularly again, Republican states. So that may change. The courts may basically decide, throw out and have a nonpartisan redistricting that will be, fairer to
Right.
to both sides, but basically that means fairer to the Democrats because these are red states we're talking about.
Okay, so hey Jim, are you still with us?
Well, let me just say one thing in here.
Go ahead, Mike.
To go back, that if indeed, the Republicans have been pushing for this kind of for their gerrymandering style redistricting. So if it actually came up with more in favor, or even slightly more in favor of the Democrats, I think that would fall into the category of poetic justice. As far as Republicans, but I'm sure Republicans now will be.
Well,
saying,
it's a demographic shift, of course. I think.
Right now, I'm sure the Republicans are going to be saying, after all their push to be able to redistrict according to their own demands, now they're going to be saying, "Oh, we did it wrong. We want to do it over."
Right. The unfortunate thing is, it may not help the Democrats, coming up in 2022. Because I was seeing one poll that Biden is ahead only by 1 point with Hispanics, which obviously that suggests a real shellacking, to use Obama's term about, I think, 2010.
Well,
so it's looks looking like a big Republican win this year in the congressional election.
Which means the Supreme Court nominee. Which really is
well, that's going to happen. With the end of the filibuster there, so the Democrats can push Breyer's successor through regardless.
Right.
So that's certain. That's probably why they're doing it now, and it's what they should have done with Ginsburg.
I'm sure. Well, again,
they shouldn't have let her stick around. They should have had her step down in 2010 when Obama could have replaced her.
Alex, you can't. It's not a matter of letting her stick around or something. Short of blackmail.
Well, if necessary, Obama should have. She had cancer 4 times, so it was pretty good odds she was gonna.
But
kill her.
He couldn't force her to step down. So
well, he could have. He didn't try to get her to.
He did. He had lunch with her, in case you don't remember.
Lunch. Okay.
He had a very long lunch with her, in which but Obama did what you should say is the ethical thing, which is that he tried to convince her or persuade her, and then he said, but he wasn't going to, do a Lyndon Johnson and twist her arm. He respected her right to make her own decision in the end. So I don't see on an ethical basis how you can fault.
It's politics. It has nothing to do with ethics.
Personal privilege.
The Supreme Court is supposed to be, it no longer is, but it was designed to be above politics. And maybe you can.
Only in people's fantasies, Mike. It's always been.
It's never been.
As Jonathan told us when we had the discussions about the court.
Yes, well, we know that, and we know for certain it definitely no longer is. It was always problematic there. But you can't fault Obama for after trying to persuade her or trying to throw up arguments why she should. If she still held to her decision that she was going to hang on, you can't fault him from not saying, look, if you don't, for resorting to blackmail or something like that, you can't fault him for being a decent person about it.
No, I don't blame him. I blame Michelle. You gotta look. For like 2 years, they couldn't get Gorsuch approved by the Republicans. They were obstinate and stubborn, and they said, no, Garland, whoever it was.
Garland, yeah.
Garland, yeah. And and Obama, he's a sweetheart. He's a nice guy. I don't want to raise my voice. I don't want anybody getting angry at me. So, there's consequences.
No, I don't agree with that at all. These are politicians. Let me hear what Steve has to say. And I think the subject at hand is redistricting, not whether Garland or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And you know, this is a serious issue because this is why the sabotage of the Election Reform Act is so decisive. But go on, Steve. What do you think about all this?
I think if it turns out that the Republicans have had a temporary setback this year, which the map that was put up by Alex showed us.
Oh, Ken put it up, actually. Give him credit.
Yeah, I'll put it up for a second. Go ahead.
Oh, Ken put it up.
Yeah.
They will view this as a temporary setback. The Republicans have been on this track at least going back to 2007, when with Koch brothers money, they invented something called the American Legislative Exchange Council, the purpose of which was...
Wait, Steve, that goes back much earlier, Alec. That goes back to the 90s. But yeah, they had well, we're going to get a little vulgar here. They called it the rat fuck operation for the 2010 census.
Well,
they took over the Republicans took over a bunch of state legislatures so that they could deliberately redistrict things in their favor, and it worked. It was a good
exactly. Well, could I just continue for a minute or two? That Alex is quite correct. I thought Alec itself, not Alex, went back to 2007. But the first proposal by Republicans, by a Republican-associated organization, to implement what we are now seeing in terms of redistricting goes back to 1989. It was proposed by an organization called the 15% Solution, and they proposed a program that would reduce the popular vote primarily by going after minorities. They called it the 15% solution because they said if we can get, we always have 15% of the electorate who are totally aligned with the Christian nationalism. If we can get the total population voting down to 30%, then we're always going to win. It was called the 15% solution. One thing that it became that very few people have heard of was the title of a book that I published in 1996 called The 15% Solution, which predicted what would happen if, among other things, the 15% solution was implemented. Unfortunately, I do have to say that a lot of the elements that I predicted have come to pass. I do want to make one comment on the Supreme Court and the role of the Supreme Court that I have made before, but it's worth making again. In the Constitution, there is no provision in Article 3 for the Supreme Court having jurisdiction over the decisions and actions of the other two branches of government. This is something that was completely invented by John Marshall in the decision Marbury versus Madison in 1803, and then several subsequent decisions of the Supreme Court. I think it's important. It's just historical. I mean, the Supreme Court obviously has the power they have. But if you talk about constitutional government, folks, it ain't in the Constitution.
Right.
Well, I'm not muted, right? Okay, Steve, please clarify that.
I'm going to say good night.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Steve.
All right, good night, Steve.
See you all next week.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good night. Good night, Steve. By the way, I just wanted to throw in two minor points. For one about the International Holocaust Remembrance Day is that again, one of the there was another poll done by a Canadian group in which they determined that over half of I guess millennials do not know the number, or put it this way, do not know the extent of the Holocaust, and about a third don't even know nothing about the Holocaust. So basically, the thrust on this for tomorrow supposedly is going to be on Holocaust education, especially since we've only got so many survivors left for so long. And on a lighter note, there was a story. So just you wanted a scientific story. So here's one that should give you pause. There is a new scientific theory that octopuses are from outer space.
Okay.
So to let you know, just in case you have any dealings with octopuses in the near future.
Oh.
All right.
Well, we're all descended from bacteria from outer space.
All right. Well, thank you. It's great to hear the great expertise of all these people who don't like to get involved in the Democratic Party, period, to try to get people out to vote. It's always fun to hear that kind of analysis of the question of the voting issues in the United States. That was a lot of fun. All right. Anyway. You've been listening to Going Viral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman. This is the January 26th edition. And we had on air Dennis Goldstein, Steve Jonas, Mike Jankowitz, Alex Stavropoulos, and Ken Aaron in California. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.